The city had become a mausoleum of memories, each brick and paving stone whispering her name. I walked through it, a ghost among the living, my own skin feeling too loose, too thin. It had been 3 months since the funeral, but the silence in our apartment still screamed. Sarah. Her name was a wound that never scabbed. I needed to escape, to sever the invisible threads that bound me to this urban tomb. My grandmother's will, a brittle parchment I'd barely glanced at, offered an unlikely refuge, an inherited manor deep in the countryside, a place I hadn't seen since I was a small, confused child. It was a distant, forgotten corner of my family's history, and now it seemed my only option. The train station hummed with a low, metallic groan, the kind that vibrates through my bones and settles in my teeth. I found myself on the platform, waiting for the last train. My head swam with exhaustion and a dull ache behind my eyes. When the train finally rumbled into view, a monstrous metal worm gleaming faintly in the tunnel's grime, it felt less like transport and more like an extension of the subterranean gloom. I stepped inside, the doors hissing shut behind me with a final, definite sigh. The carriage was almost empty, just a few other weary figures scattered like lost luggage. I slumped into a seat, pressing my forehead against the cold window, watching the blur of the tunnel walls. The rhythm of the train, a hypnotic clatter and sway, usually lulled me. Not tonight. Tonight it felt like a countdown. The carriage lights flickered again, longer this time, threatening to extinguish completely before sputtering back to life. The train slowed not to a station, but to a crawl, then to a complete halt. The hum of the engine died. A profound silence descended, broken only by the drip of water somewhere in the unseen depths of the subway tunnel. Last train. Doors won't open. I looked around. The other passengers, previously oblivious, now stirred, their faces etched with confusion. A young woman across from me pulled out her phone, its screen a solitary beacon in the sudden gloom. No signal, of course. I pushed myself up, walked to the doors, and pressed the release button. Nothing. I tried again, pressing harder, a frantic rhythm against the unyielding metal. The doors remained sealed, an impenetrable barrier. Then came the sound. It wasn't loud, not at first. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, a low, drawn-out note that vibrated through the floor. It felt wrong. It didn't sound mechanical nor human. It sounded like a breath held too long, then slowly released. My breath hitched in my throat. I pressed my ear against the door, straining to hear, to understand. It seemed to be in the walls, in the air, inside my own skull. I felt a sudden, inexplicable urge to run, though there was nowhere to go. My heart hammered against my ribs, a trapped bird. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, but they persisted like static on a dying screen. My skin crawled. I backed away from the doors, bumping into a seat, my legs unsteady. It was a sound that seemed to dismantle thought, to unravel the very fabric of hearing. It was utterly alien. Then, with a sudden, violent jolt, the train lurched forward, throwing me against the opposite wall. The other passengers looked dazed, disoriented, but no one spoke of the sound. Had I imagined it? Had the grief, the exhaustion finally broken me? But the memory of that sound, that formless, impossible chorus, clung to me like a shroud. That night solidified it. I couldn't stay. The city had become a place of waking nightmares, and my own mind, a treacherous landscape. The manor. It was a desperate flight, a retreat into the unknown. Perhaps the only place left where I might find a quiet corner to mourn, to simply exist without the world twisting into something sinister around me. I needed to outrun the echoes. The journey was long, a blur of gray highways giving way to narrow, winding country roads, then finally to little more than a dirt track overgrown with weeds. The landscape grew wilder, the trees denser, their skeletal branches reaching like grasping fingers against a perpetually overcast sky. Isolation was what I craved, and the manor promised it in abundance. It appeared suddenly through a gap in the gnarled oaks, a silhouette against the bruised sky. My grandmother's house. Turrets rose at odd angles, capped with rusted finials, and a massive leaded front door, scarred by time, stood at the top of a crumbling stone staircase. Ivy, thick as ropes, clung to its walls, pulling at the mortar, giving the impression that the house itself was slowly being strangled by the earth. It was beautiful in a grotesque, decaying way, a testament to a forgotten grandeur. The air here was different, thinner, sharper, carrying a metallic tang I couldn't place. My boots crunched on the gravel path, the sound unnaturally loud. As I approached the front door, a faint, sweet smell like dried flowers and old paper drifted on the wind. Or was it something else? something sickly, cloying like overripe fruit left too long in the sun. I paused, inhaling deeply, trying to identify it, but it dissipated as quickly as it came. Dust motes danced in the slivers of weak light that pierced the grimy windows, something faintly metallic, like old pennies, but sharper, beneath the pervasive sweetness. My breath plumed in the frigid air. I stepped inside, the floorboards groaning beneath my weight, a symphony of creaks and complaints. The entrance hall was vast, dimly lit by a towering, stained glass window depicting a scene I couldn't quite make out in the gloom. Cobwebs draped like forgotten tapestries. My gaze drifted to a small, ornate table near the foot of the stairs. On it, nestled amongst a collection of yellowed letters and a chipped porcelain doll, lay a small, tarnished silver locket. It was open, revealing a faded photograph of a young woman with kind eyes and a faint, knowing smile. It was Sarah. My Sarah. Impossible. I hadn't seen that locket in years. She always kept it tucked away, a private memento from her own grandmother. How could it be here, in this forgotten house, waiting for me? And why was it open, as if someone had just finished looking at it? Every morning I woke to the phantom weight of her beside me, a hollow impression in the mattress. The silence in our apartment was a physical thing, a suffocating shroud. The thought of staying, of letting the echoes consume me, became unbearable, so I left, packed what little mattered and drove north, chasing the promise of quiet. The old manor, my estranged grandmother's legacy, loomed on the horizon like a craggy skeletal hand reaching from the earth. It was remote, exactly what I needed. A place where the past could, perhaps, be buried. The gate, a rusted moor of wrought iron, groaned open at my touch, the sound scraping against the profound quiet. The sheer scale of it was daunting, but also strangely comforting, a blank slate, or so I hoped. Inside, the air was thick with the dust of decades, tasting of forgotten spices and something metallic like old pennies. Sunlight, weak and diffused, struggled through grimy panes, illuminating motes dancing in the stagnant air. Every floorboard sighed under my weight, a chorus of dry groans. My footsteps echoed, too loud, too solitary. I ran a hand over a banister, the wood slick with grime, a thin layer of dust adhering to my fingertips. My grandmother had lived here alone for so long. What did she do in these cavernous rooms? Pulling back a sheet, I revealed a velvet armchair, its fabric faded to a muted burgundy, smelling faintly of lavender and disuse. A brass lamp stood beside it, its shade warped. I flicked the switch. Nothing. I tried another. Faulty wiring, naturally. The house was old. Everything here would need attention. A sudden, sharp drop in temperature sent a shiver through me. It clung to the air near a tall, empty bookshelf before dissipating just as quickly. My breath plumed for a moment. Stress, I told myself, rubbing my arms, or maybe a draft I hadn't located. The house was a sieve, after all. I moved through the ground floor, opening doors to vast, empty rooms that smelled of mildew and stale air. In what might have been a study, I found a heavy oak desk, its surface scarred. Dust lay thick on everything. Underneath a pile of brittle, yellowed newspapers, I discovered a small, leather-bound photo album. Its cover was cracked, the pages stiff. Inside, sepia-toned faces stared out at me. My grandmother, younger, her expression already severe, stood beside a man I didn't recognize, his eyes strangely distant. Other faces, strangers, posed stiffly in front of this very house, or what looked like it. A family, certainly. My family, but unknown to me. Their gazes seemed to follow me, a silent, unnerving scrutiny. I flipped a page. The chest itself looked ancient, intricate carvings snaking across its lid. But the faces in that particular photo, they were blurred as if caught in motion, or perhaps the film itself had warped. I stared, trying to decipher the obscured features, but they remained stubbornly indistinct. It was almost a word, but formless, meaningless. I spun around, my heart giving a clumsy thump. Just the dust motes dancing in the weak light. My imagination, frayed by grief, playing tricks. I climbed the grand staircase, the wooden steps groaning beneath each footfall. On the second floor, the bedrooms were equally vast and neglected. One, clearly my grandmother's, contained a heavy four-poster bed draped in cobwebs, a vanity table laden with tarnished silver brushes. In a corner, tucked away beneath a moth-eaten tapestry, I found it. The chest from the photograph. A heavy tarnished brass lock, ornate and complex, secured it. I tugged at the lid, tested the lock. It was unyielding. My fingers traced the cold metal, then the raised carvings. They felt sharp, almost alive under my touch. What was inside? Why was it locked away? As I knelt, a sudden, disorienting shift occurred. The air grew heavy, thick with the metallic tang of ozone and damp concrete. The smell of dust vanished, replaced by the cloying scent of stale urine and exhaust fumes. The walls around me seemed to ripple, the wood grain dissolving into grimy tiles. I was no longer in the manor. I was in a subway tunnel, last train, doors won't open. The low rumble of distant machinery vibrated through the floor. Panic flared, hot and sharp, seizing my throat. Trapped. Alone. Then, just as abruptly, it was gone. The tunnel dissolved. The concrete walls peeling back to reveal the faded wallpaper of the manor bedroom. The metallic tang vanished, replaced by the familiar must and dust. My breathing was ragged, my heart racing. A hallucination. A vivid, terrifying hallucination. Grief, I thought, pressing the heels of my palms into my eyes. Just grief twisting my perception. The city was still clinging to me, even here. I stood, my legs unsteady. What secrets did it hold? Locked away in this decaying house, waiting for me to find them. The quiet of the manor, vast and cold, offered no solace. Every creak of the old floorboards, every draft that sighed through the tall windows seemed to carry a memory. I'd moved my things, what little I could bear to pack, from our apartment into the smallest bedroom, the one with a window overlooking the overgrown garden. It felt less cavernous, less ready to swallow me whole. Still, sleep was a fragile thing. I would wake, often to the feeling of a shift in the mattress beside me, a phantom pressure that suggested a presence, a warmth that wasn't there. My fingers would reach out, brushing only the cool, empty sheet. One evening, while I was trying to read in the dim light of the study, a faint melody drifted from the hallway. It was a tune I knew intimately, a lullaby she used to hum, barely audible, like a breath caught in the air. My head snapped up, the book falling to my lap. My breath hitched. The air in the room grew heavy, thick with the scent of lilies and rain, her favorite perfume. I sat very still, listening, my ears straining against the silence that followed. Nothing, just the settling groans of the old house. I told myself it was the wind, whistling through a loose pane or a memory, conjured by the sheer weight of my sorrow. It had to be, but the scent lingered, a ghostly caress against my skin. Had I imagined it? The next day, the unease gnawed at me. I called a colleague, a man who had always been grounded, practical. "William, good to hear from you. How's the new place?" he asked, his voice crackling slightly through the phone. I tried to make light of it. "It's big and old, really old." I paused, then plunged in. "Look, I know it sounds crazy, but I think I'm hearing things, smelling things. Anyone would be seeing and hearing things. Grief plays tricks. It's probably just the stress of moving, of everything." His tone was kind, but laced with a clear, almost clinical dismissal. "Maybe you just need to get out, clear your head, go for a walk, get some fresh air." He didn't believe me, or perhaps he simply couldn't comprehend what I was trying to articulate. Was he right? Was it all just the cruel architecture of my own suffering, building phantoms from dust and memory? I decided to take his advice, to break the suffocating routine of the manor. I walked for what felt like miles, eventually finding myself at a subway station, its entrance a gaping maw in the grime-streaked concrete. I bought a ticket, descending into the cool, metallic air of the underground. The platform was mostly empty. The doors hissed shut with a finality that felt absolute. The train lurched forward, rattling through the subway tunnel, a blur of grimy tiles and flickering lights. It was a monotonous journey, the rhythmic clatter against the rails almost hypnotic. Then the train slowed, not at a station, but deep within the tunnel. It shuddered to a halt. A voice clear as a bell spoke from the intercom, not the usual automated announcement, but him voice. "William, are you there?" My skin prickled, every hair on my arm stood on end. My chest tightened, a vice grip. I tried to shout, to answer, but only a choked gasp escaped. I spun around, frantically searching the empty car. The doors wouldn't open. Why did I leave? A shape began to coalesce in the dim light of the opposite seat. A shimmering outline, a faint luminescence like moonlight filtering through gauze, her silhouette. My breath caught in my throat. I could almost see the curve of her smile, the way her hair fell around her shoulders. He was there, not a memory, not a trick of the light, but there. My vision swam. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic. I pressed myself against the window, staring into the impenetrable blackness of the tunnel, willing it to be over. This couldn't be real. It couldn't, could it? The train lurched again, the lights flickered back to full brightness, and the doors hissed open onto a deserted platform. The car was empty. The scent of lilies and rain was gone, replaced by the acrid smell of ozone and stale air. The voice was gone. The shimmering shape was gone. I stumbled out, gasping, my legs weak beneath me. I leaned against a grimy pillar, trying to steady my breathing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. There was I finally breaking. Had the grief, the isolation, the strange manner finally eroded the edges of my perception? There was I truly seeing and hearing things that weren't there, or was something else reaching out, twisting the reality around me, using my deepest pain as its lever? I made my way back to the manor in a daze, the city lights blurring into streaks of color. The key felt heavy in my hand, the lock a hungry click. Inside, the silence was no longer empty but expectant. I walked through the echoing halls, each step a tremor of uncertainty. I reached the study, seeking the faint comfort of the old books. As I passed the heavy oak desk, my gaze fell upon a framed photograph I had placed there days ago, a picture of us, laughing, sunlight in our eyes. But now, it wasn't the same. Her face in the photograph was subtly altered. Had the light shifted, or was the manor, and whatever lurked within, beginning to distort even the most cherished fragments of my past? Smallest bedroom, the one with a window overlooking a tangle of overgrown rose bushes. I'd spent the better part of the afternoon dragging the few boxes I'd managed to pack from the city up the winding stairs, their contents still mostly untouched. The room felt cold, the air thick with the scent of dust and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet, like old blood or decaying flowers. My wife hated roses. I remembered her sharp, playful complaints about the thorns, the way she'd recoil from their scent, claiming it was too cloying. Now the memory felt like a fresh wound. I tried to unpack, to impose some order on the chaos of grief, but my hands felt clumsy, my mind elsewhere. The silence of the manor pressed in, vast and oppressive. It wasn't empty, not truly. It was exhausting, this constant vigilance against nothing. My gaze drifted around the room. The desk looked out of place, too grand for this small, humble room. It was old, scarred with rings from forgotten cups and faint, etched lines from frantic pens. A thin layer of dust coated its surface, disturbed only by the faint outline of where a lamp might have sat. It offered a tangible anchor in a world that felt increasingly fluid. I found myself pulling out the drawers, one after another, not out of curiosity, but a vague, restless compulsion. They were empty save for a few desiccated insect husks and a faint smell of camphor. The bottom drawer, however, was stiff. I braced myself, tugging harder. It scraped open with a groan that echoed in the quiet room, revealing only more emptiness. But as I pushed it back in, my thumb snagged on something. A slight resistance, a minute give in the back panel. My breath hitched. It was barely visible, a hairline seam where the wood grain didn't quite match. My heart, already a frantic drum against my ribs, picked up a frantic, uneven rhythm. I pressed harder, my fingers tracing the outline. There, a small, almost invisible button flush with the wood. It was meant to be missed. I pressed it. A soft click. My hand trembled as I reached inside, my fingers brushing against stiff paper. I pulled out a bundle, wrapped in a brittle, faded silk scarf. The silk disintegrated under my touch, crumbling into dust that clung to my fingers. Inside was a small leather-bound journal, its cover worn smooth, its pages yellowed and brittle. There was no name, no title, just the faint impression of a pressed flower on the front. My grandmother's. This wasn't just old junk. This was something hidden, something important. I opened it carefully, fearing the pages would tear. The ink was faded. The handwriting initially elegant, then growing increasingly frantic, sloping, sometimes almost illegible. The earliest entries were mundane, observations about the weather, chores, visitors. Then a shift. The quiet here, it's not truly quiet. There's a hum beneath it, a vibration in the walls, in the very air. I hear things, not truly. My eyes darted around the small room, the hairs on my arms prickling. I'd heard them too, just at the edge of hearing, unintelligible. Unsettling, I dismissed it as stress, as grief-fueled delusion. But my grandmother, they speak of a promise, a bargain I don't understand. I never wanted this. The weight of it, the knowing, it's too much. A promise, a bargain, what was she talking about? My mind raced, grappling with the cryptic words. This wasn't the ramblings of a lonely old woman, not entirely. The entries grew shorter, more disjointed. Dates skipped. Words were scratched out, rewritten. The pact binds us, all of us. And now it calls to me. They want something. They always want something. The pact. It wasn't just a haunting. It was a legacy. My family. What had they done? What had they agreed to? A sudden jarring lurch. The room around me dissolved. The walls blurred, the desk vanished. I was no longer in the small bedroom. The air grew thick with a metallic tang, sharp and acrid. The rhythmic clatter of metal on metal filled my ears, a violent, inescapable rumble. The scent of ozone and stale sweat choked me. I was standing swaying in a narrow, brightly lit space. A subway tunnel, last train, doors won't open. The train was packed, bodies pressed against me, silent, unmoving. Their faces were indistinct, blurred smudges in the artificial light. I tried to move, to cry out, but my limbs were heavy, unresponsive. The train jolted again, a sickening, grinding halt. The doors, a seamless metallic expanse, remained stubbornly shut. A muffled voice, distorted by the rumbling, echoed somewhere far off, unintelligible, yet somehow familiar. I was trapped. Then just as suddenly, the smell, the sound, the claustrophobic press of bodies vanished. I was back in the small bedroom, the journal clutched so tightly in my hand that my knuckles ached. The metallic scent still lingered faintly in my nostrils, a phantom sensation. Had I imagined it? A hallucination brought on by the stress, the isolation, the disturbing words in the journal, or was it something else, something trying to break through? My gaze fell back to the open journal, to the last legible words scrawled with desperate urgency. It watches, it waits, and now it knows I've tried to warn him. My William, forgive me. Warn me about what? What did my grandmother know, and why did she think I was involved? The pact. The sudden, terrifying shift in reality. The pact. My grandmother's warning. The whispers that had clawed their way from the walls of the manor and into my mind. They were not figments of grief. They were real. I was certain of it now. My family's legacy wasn't just old money and a decaying house. It was a debt, etched in shadows, and I was the next collection point. I wouldn't be consumed without a fight. I had to get out, even if only for a few hours. A desperate impulse, a gnawing need for external input, drove me towards the city. I thought perhaps some archive, some forgotten public record, might hold the key to understanding this pact. Or maybe I just needed to breathe air that hadn't been filtered through generations of malevolence. The drive was a blur of gray road and overcast sky, my mind racing, dissecting every strange event since I'd arrived. I found myself drawn to the city's underbelly, not its gleaming towers. The old district, where buildings huddled shoulder to shoulder, their brick facades stained with a century of grime. It felt more honest, somehow, than the manicured lawns of the manor. But the unease followed me, a low hum beneath the urban din. It was a pressure in my skull, a subtle distortion at the edges of my vision. Then an inexplicable pull. A specific station entrance, its metal gates grimy, the concrete steps worn smooth by millions of hurried feet. I descended, the air growing cooler, heavier, smelling of damp earth and something acrid metallic. The rumble started low, a vibration through the soles of my shoes, growing into a guttural roar as a train hurtled past. This wasn't the first time I'd taken a subway, but tonight the familiar felt alien. The platform emptied around me. A lone figure, huddled on a bench, eventually rose and disappeared up the stairs. The digital clock above the tracks flickered, displaying last train, perfect, solitude. The exact opposite of what I craved. When the train finally arrived, it seemed to crawl in, its lights dim, its metal skin scarred with graffiti. It groaned to a halt, a sigh of compressed air. I stepped inside. The carriage was empty, completely empty, not a single soul. My breath hitched. This wasn't right. Even on the last train, there were usually a few stragglers. The seats, upholstered in faded, patterned fabric, seemed to lean in, their empty forms watching me. I chose a seat near the window, trying to appear nonchalant, as if this was perfectly normal. The doors hissed shut. The train lurched forward. We plunged into the subway tunnel. Last train, doors won't open. My reflection stared back from the glass, pale and drawn, but behind it, in the deep obsidian of the tunnel, something shifted. It moved with the train, keeping pace, a vague, formless shape. Then the lights inside the carriage flickered. Once, twice. I could smell something else now. Beneath the metallic tang of the tunnel, a faint, sweet scent like dried roses and something else. Something sickly sweet like decay. Her scent. I squeezed my eyes shut, then opened them again, trying to dispel the growing panic. This was a train, a mundane, albeit empty train, but the sweet scent intensified, filling my lungs, tightening my chest. It was her, my wife. Her face, so achingly familiar, yet horribly wrong. Her eyes, usually the color of warm honey, were vast black pools that swallowed the dim light. Her lips, once soft and full, were stretched into a rictus smile, too wide, too sharp. Her hair, usually a cascade of rich brown, seemed to writhe, strands like grasping tendrils. She wore the dress from our last anniversary, a flowing crimson silk, but the fabric seemed to ripple and shift, like water, not cloth. She pressed her face against the glass, her breath fogging the pain from the outside. Even though we were deep underground, sealed within a moving train, a faint, wet hiss escaped her lips, and the sound was not hers. It wasn't her voice. It was a mockery, a twisted echo laced with malice. I remember our last ride. My heart slammed against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat. This was a nightmare. This wasn't real. He was gone, dead. I had held her hand as she slipped away. The way you let go. A sharp, unbearable pain lanced through my chest. The memory. Final moments, my grip on her hand weakening until it slipped. It was the deepest wound, the rawest grief, and it was being flayed open, exposed to this thing. I pushed myself against the seat, trying to retreat, but there was nowhere to go. Her hand, long and skeletal, with fingers that ended in sharp, black nails, pressed against the glass. It flattened, distorting the glass, as if pushing through an invisible membrane. The sweet, decaying rose scent choked me. You are mine. William, the twisted echo of his voice reverberated through the carriage, through my skull, just as they all were. The train shuddered violently. The lights went out completely, plunging us into absolute blackness. Then a single, agonizingly slow flicker of the emergency lights, just enough to illuminate the window. But pressed against the glass from the inside was a single, black, skeletal handprint. I was breathing in ragged gasps, my body trembling uncontrollably. It was a direct assault, a violation of my most sacred grief, manifesting as the one person I had lost. It knew me. It knew my pain. It was hunting me, but why now? Why here in this subway tunnel? Last train, doors won't open. And what exactly did it mean by just as they all were? There was my family's packed a lineage of victims, or something far more sinister. The blast of sound, a shriek that tore through the blackness of the subway tunnel, snapped something taut inside me. My lungs burned, air trapped, refusing to escape. The train shuddered again, a violent, metallic groan that resonated through the floor and up into my teeth. I clamped my hands over my ears, but the whispers, now a cacophony, clawed at the fragile edges of my sanity. They were everywhere, a buzzing swarm of phantom voices, some familiar, some utterly alien, all of them mocking, demanding. My wife's name, then my own, stretched and distorted into a grotesque plea. Then, as abruptly as the lights had died, they flickered back to life, bathing the carriage in a sickly yellow glow. The whispers vanished, leaving an unbearable silence. My heart hammered against my ribs, a trapped bird desperate for freedom. The doors, still stubbornly sealed, seemed to mock my relief. Panic clawed its way up my throat. I stumbled towards the nearest emergency release, my fingers fumbling, slick with sweat. The latch was stiff, refusing to budge. I pulled, I twisted, I hammered. Nothing, my breath hitched. Another shudder, no, not again. The lights dimmed, then brightened, a cruel tease. Just as despair threatened to swallow me whole, the train lurched forward, rattling into the next station. With a hiss of hydraulics, the doors slid open. I didn't wait. I scrambled out, half falling onto the grimy platform, the metallic tang of the tunnel air still thick in my nostrils. The few other passengers who'd been on the last train regarded me with blank stares, as if nothing unusual had happened. Had they not heard it? My legs trembled, refusing to hold steady. I didn't look back. I just walked, one foot in front of the other, through the deserted station, up the escalator, and out into the biting night air. Back at the manor, the silence was different. It was a heavy, knowing quiet that settled around me like a shroud. The grandfather clock in the hall ticked with an exaggerated solemnity, each beat a judgment. I hadn't slept, not really, since I arrived. The fear, an icy current beneath my skin, kept me perpetually wired. But now it was more than fear. It was a desperate, burning need for answers. I couldn't ignore it anymore. The house, my family, the things I'd seen and heard, they demanded to be understood. I went to my grandmother's study, the room I had mostly avoided. It was a mausoleum of forgotten knowledge, crammed with shelves overflowing with books, dusty ledgers, and stacks of brittle papers. The air hung thick with the scent of aged paper, mildew, and something else, something faintly metallic and unsettling. I started with the shelves, running my fingers over the spines of books on local history, botany, even some on obscure folklore. Many of them were bound in faded leather, their titles hand-lettered and arcane. I pulled down a thick, leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed and fragile. The handwriting inside was an elegant, looping script, my grandmother's. It spoke of mundane things at first, garden notes, household expenses, but then abruptly the entries changed. He says they come from the woods that they call to him. My brother, so bright, so full of life, now stares at the trees for hours. He speaks of a chorus, a song without words that promises forgotten things. My breath hitched. A chorus. The chorale of echoes, the memory-stealing entity. This was it. I scoured more journals, more letters. It takes what we forget and leaves only echoes behind. It lives in the woods, they say, woven into the very roots of the ancient oaks. My eyes burned, gritty from lack of sleep, but I couldn't stop. I pulled out old newspaper clippings tucked between the pages of a local history book. Vague reports of unexplained disappearances in the area, dating back to the late 19th century. The local sheriff, a stoic-looking man in one grainy photograph, attributed them to wanderlust or mental infirmity. But I knew better. Or was I finally seeing what had always been here, hidden in plain sight? The journals and articles painted a terrifying picture, a legacy of madness, of disappearances, all tied to the manor and the ancient woods that surrounded it. A thing, a presence, that stole memories and lives. My family wasn't just haunted, they were bound, victims of an ancient pact. And I, William, was next. I closed the last journal, the brittle paper crackling under my trembling fingers. What had my grandmother known, and why had she left me here to face this alone? My eyes burned, gritty from lack of sleep, but I couldn't stop. A few described individuals found wandering in the woods, babbling about impossible geometries and a song that never ended. My fingers traced the faded print, the ink smudging under my touch. The house groaned around me, a low, sustained sigh that vibrated through the floorboards, up my chair into my bones. It was a familiar sound by now, the voice of the old structure settling, but tonight it felt different, thicker, more deliberate. I pushed away from the table, the chair scraping loudly across the polished wood. The silence that followed was too sudden, too absolute. Even the usual creaks and whispers of the old house had ceased. I stood, my legs stiff, and walked to the study door. I remembered closing it. I was certain I had. I peered out, my breath catching. The hallway stretched longer than I remembered, the wallpaper patterns blurring into an indistinct swirl. The grandfather clock, usually at the far end, was gone. Instead, there was an archway I'd never seen before, draped in heavy, faded velvet, leading to what looked like a much older wing of the house. My grandmother had never mentioned another wing. I had explored every inch of this place, or so I thought. A tremor went through me. This wasn't right. I backed away slowly, my hand reaching for the doorknob. I twisted. It didn't turn. I tried again, harder, my grip tightening. Locked. The door was locked. I tried to pull it open, then push it, but it was unyielding, solid as stone. I turned back to the study, my gaze sweeping the familiar room. The fireplace, the dusty bookshelves, the portrait of a stern-faced ancestor, all were there, yet they felt wrong, subtly shifted. The ancestor's eyes, usually fixed and unseeing, seemed to follow me. I stumbled, bumping into the research table, sending the stack of newspaper clippings scattering to the floor. No, I mumbled, my voice rough. This isn't happening. I moved to the window, needing the reassurance of the outside world. Moonlight should be painting the overgrown gardens, but instead, an impenetrable fog pressed against the glass, thick and gray, swallowing everything beyond. It tasted of salt and something acrid. I pressed my palm against the pane. It was warm, radiating a faint, unnatural heat. I had to get out. I pulled at the doorknob again, grunting with effort, but it held fast. Frustration flared, hot and desperate. I slammed my shoulder into the wood. The door shuddered, but the lock held. My shoulder throbbed. I tried a different approach. If the study door was locked, I would find another way. The house had many exits. I walked to the wall opposite the door, where I knew a small, seldom-used passage led to the servants' stairs. My fingers scrabbled for the hidden latch, but there was no latch, no passage. I ran my hands over it, frantic, searching for a seam, a hinge, anything. Nothing. It was as if it had never existed. My breathing grew shallow. My head swam. I felt a profound sense of disorientation, as if the floor beneath my feet was subtly tilting. I closed my eyes, trying to clear my thoughts, to steady myself. When I opened them, the study was gone. I was standing in a narrow, damp corridor, the air heavy with the metallic tang I'd smelled earlier. The walls were rough concrete, stained with what looked like ancient rust and grime. A low hum vibrated through the ground, a deep thrumming that seemed to resonate in my chest. The smell of ozone was thick. My gaze snapped to the end of the corridor. There it was, a platform, tracks, a vast echoing space, an impossible, monstrous realization. This wasn't a part of the house, it couldn't be. The humid air clung to my skin. From the tunnel's maw, a faint light appeared, growing steadily, accompanied by the screech of metal on metal. A train. It slid to a halt before me, its ancient doors hissing open with a sound like escaping steam. I hesitated, mind screaming at the impossibility. But the tunnel stretched infinitely in both directions, and the train was the only point of light, the only suggestion of movement in this terrifying, fabricated reality. A desperate hope flickered, an escape. I stepped inside. The doors hissed shut behind me, not with a gentle click, but with a heavy, grinding thud that vibrated through the floor. I whirled, grabbing at the cold metal, pushing, pulling. They wouldn't budge. They were sealed. Forever. The train remained still. No lurch, no forward motion. Just the low hum of something dormant, something waiting. I was trapped. Utterly, completely trapped within this impossible space, within the house that had swallowed me whole. Where was the conductor? Was there another way out of this car? The glass was cold, a chill that seeped into my bones, promising nothing but more isolation. The fog outside, thick and gray, tasted of salt and something acrid. A metallic tang that pricked at my tongue even through the glass. It wasn't natural fog. It was too dense, too still, a solid wall pressing against the manor against me. I pulled my hand back, a faint, burning impression on my skin. Then the world lurched, not the floor beneath me but the very air. A sickening drop, like the bottom falling out of a dream. My stomach clenched. The view outside the window didn't blur or distort. It simply vanished. One moment, the gray wall of fog. The next, absolute blackness pressing in from all sides, suffocating. I gasped, stumbling backward, hitting a wall that shouldn't have been there. It was cold, damp concrete, rough against my shoulder. The scent of ozone and stale earth filled my nostrils, replacing the acrid salt. Where was the window? Where was the manor? My hands shot out, scrabbling. My fingers met cool, ridged metal. A train car? No. The air thrummed with a low, metallic groan. A sound that vibrated through the soles of my shoes, up my legs, into my teeth. It was the deep, resonant hum of machinery, but distorted, stretched thin, like a scream played in slow motion. The blackness was not total. Faint, flickering lights, the color of bruised plums, ghosted along the curved ceiling of what I now recognized as a subway tunnel. Last train, doors won't open. My breath hitched. How was I here? One moment the manor, the fog. The next, this confined, rattling space. The disorientation was physical, a nauseating spin that threatened to buckle my knees. I gripped the cold metal pole beside me, my grip tight. The train wasn't moving, yet the vibrations persisted, a phantom motion. The air was heavy, thick with the smell of old grease, damp concrete, and something else, something cloying and sweet, like decaying flowers. Through the grimy window of the train, I could see only the rough, unyielding wall of the tunnel, streaked with rust and grime. I tried the doors. A solid, unyielding surface. No handle, no release. The emergency latch, if there was one, was nowhere to be found. I pounded on the metal, a dull thud swallowed by the pervasive hum. Not from my own mind this time, but from the very air curling around my ears, a chorus of faint, overlapping voices, like distant echoes in a vast, empty chamber. They were too many, too indistinct to make out words, but the feeling they conveyed was unmistakable, ancient, hungry, patient. My gaze snagged on something in the corner of the train car, a small, tarnished silver locket lying innocently on the grimy floor. My grandmother's locket. The one I'd found in her study, the one that had been empty. I bent down, my fingers trembling as I picked it up. Inside, where there should have been a faded photograph, was a miniature, impossibly detailed etching. It depicted a family tree, gnarled and ancient, its roots plunging into a swirling vortex. At the base of the vortex, a stylized, multifaceted eye peered out from the chaos, its gaze seeming to fix directly on me. Along the branches of the tree, names were etched, faint and barely legible. I saw William, my father's name, my grandfather's, and then a series of older, unfamiliar names stretching back generations. Each name, I realized with a sickening jolt, had a tiny, faded symbol beside it, a broken circle, a fractured anchor. They wove together, forming a horrifying tapestry of sound, like a choir of forgotten memories. I heard fragments, shards of conversation not spoken aloud but imprinted directly onto my mind. The pact, for power, to stave off the rot, the other horror. My fingers tightened around the locket, the cold metal biting into my palm. The rot, what other horror? Was it something my ancestors feared more than this? More fragments emerged from the cacophony. A sacrifice, every few generations, an anchor, the inheritor, the designated one. My breath caught in my throat. The designated one, the anchor. My name, William, stood out on that tiny etched tree, vibrant and sharp, unlike the faded script of my ancestors, and beside it the same symbol, a fractured anchor. The true horror of it slammed into me. A physical blow that left me gasping. This wasn't just a haunted house, a lingering curse. This was a covenant, a desperate ancient bargain. My family hadn't simply been victims, they had been architects, a designated member of each generation to become the vessel, the tether, the anchor for the chorale of echoes. I was not just a victim, I was the next offering, the chosen one, not me. My wife, my beautiful wife, taken from me, shattered. Was she part of this? Was her death a precursor, a weakening of the old bonds, forcing the hand of this ancient entity? Or was it merely part of the endless grief it fed upon? The train car groaned again, louder this time, a sound that seemed to come from deep within the earth. It vibrated through me, not just sound, but a presence, a hungry, waiting entity. What did an anchor do? What did it hold? My lungs burned, the air thick and cold as it scraped down my throat. My name, William. Etched on that gnarled, impassable tree, a fresh wound among centuries of fading scars. A fractured anchor beside it, mirroring the symbol I'd seen so many times, now clinging to my own identity. The designated one, the anchor. The words echoed, not just in my mind, but a faint, vibrating hum in the very floorboards beneath my feet. I wasn't just trapped in this house. I was a part of it, bound to it. A link in a chain stretching back into a darkness I was only just beginning to comprehend. The horror wasn't just in the knowledge, but in the sickening realization of inevitability. My wife, was she an anchor too once? No, she couldn't have been. That thought was too much to bear. A desperate surge of adrenaline ripped through me, a primal need to sever the cord. I wouldn't be an anchor. I wouldn't be designated. I stumbled back from the tree, the rough bark scraping my fingertips as I pulled away, as if its touch could infect me further. This place was a cage, but cages had doors. I had to get out, now. I didn't bother with the front door, remembering the impassable distances and warped reality of previous attempts. My car, my old sedan, parked stubbornly in the overgrown driveway. It was my last tether to the world outside, a metallic promise of escape. I burst through the back door, the wood groaning on its hinges, and scrambled down the crumbling steps. A low, gray fog clung to the ground, swallowing the distant tree line and blurring the edges of the crumbling outbuildings. My breath plumed in ragged clouds. I fumbled with the car keys, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped them into the dew-laden grass. I slammed the car into reverse, gravel spitting from under the tires, and spun it around, aiming for the long, winding drive that led back to the main road. The headlights cut feeble paths through the encroaching mist, making the familiar path seem alien, indistinct. The drive stretched on, longer than I remembered. The trees on either side, skeletal fingers reaching through the fog, seemed to press closer, their branches scratching against the car's windows with an unnerving rhythm. I pressed harder on the accelerator, the old engine whining in protest. The road was supposed to bend sharply to the left, then open onto the county highway. But the turn never came. The straight stretch persisted, the fog thickening into an impenetrable wall. My heart hammered against my ribs, a trapped bird desperate for flight. Then, the world outside the windshield fractured. The trees dissolved into concrete pillars. The damp, earthy smell gave way to ozone and stale metal. The muffled thrum of my engine was replaced by a deep, resonant rumble that vibrated through the very floor of the car. I slammed on the brakes, the tires squealing on an unseen surface. I wasn't on the driveway anymore. The car sat, stark and out of place, on a set of gleaming metal tracks. The air was heavy, smelling of damp rock, burnt electrical wires, and something else, something cloying and ancient, like disturbed earth. A subway tunnel. How? My mind reeled, trying to reconcile the impassable transition. A distant shriek of metal on metal echoed down the tunnel, growing louder, closer. A train. I scrambled out of the car, my legs almost giving way beneath me, and stumbled onto the narrow walkway beside the tracks. The roar intensified, a monstrous sound that filled the confined space. A gust of hot, grimy air blasted past me, carrying the stench of rust and human desperation. Each carriage was identical, an endless procession of vacant, unseeing eyes. I pressed myself against the grimy wall, the vibrations rattling my teeth. It felt like it would never end. But then, with a final screeching hiss of brakes, it stopped. The last train. Its doors, a row of dull metallic rectangles, remained stubbornly shut. I pounded on one, my fist bruising against the unyielding surface. Hello, no handles, no buttons, just smooth, cold metal, trapped. A deep thrumming began then, not from the train, but from the very air around me. It vibrated in my chest, a low, resonant hum that felt like a chord struck deep within my own bones. The air grew heavy, thick with that metallic, acrid scent. It was close. I could feel it, a vast, unseen presence pressing in. My breath hitched. I fell, scraping my knees on the rough concrete. I clawed at the ground, my fingernails tearing on the grit, my body screaming in protest. The fractured anchor. It wasn't just a symbol, it was a tether. The world spun. The tunnel walls blurred into a vortex of gray and black. The metallic hum intensified, piercing my skull. The pull was relentless, an invisible current dragging me against my will, not just physically, but tearing at the very fabric of my perception. I felt like a rag doll, being yanked and twisted, stretched thin between two realities. Then, a sudden, violent wrench. The air exploded from my lungs. When I next opened my eyes, the familiar pattern of water stains on the manor's attic ceiling greeted me. The scent of dust and decay filled my nostrils. My body ached, every muscle protesting, my knees raw and bleeding. The rough, splintered floorboards pressed against my back. I was lying in the attic, back in the house. The windows high above showed only the endless gray fog. I tried to move, but a profound exhaustion, deeper than physical fatigue, rooted me to the spot. The only sound was the slow, steady drip of water somewhere in the distant corners of the attic. I had tried to escape. I had failed. The house, or whatever held it, had reached out, twisted the very world, and dragged me back. There was truly no way out. The name, William, carved into the ancient bark, seemed to pulse with a cold, internal light. It wasn't just a name, it was a brand, a claim. The gnarled tree, impossibly old, impossibly alive, bled a dark, viscous sap that glistened like crude oil, mirroring the fractured anchor symbol beside my name. It had been there, on the journals, on the stone in the hidden room, a silent promise of ruin. Now it clung to my own identity, a grotesque tattoo on the world itself. My lungs burned, each breath a shallow scrape against a tightening chest. The world around me spun, the twisted branches of the tree blurring into a dizzying vortex. The ground beneath my feet dissolved, replaced by a shuddering vibration that resonated deep in my bones. One moment, I was staring at my name on that impossible tree, the next, I was here. The air was thick and stale, tasting of ozone and something vaguely chemical. The walls, grimy concrete and rusted metal, pressed close, smelling of mildew and forgotten iron. I stood in the narrow gap between the platform and the train itself, the air heavy and still. Panic clawed at my throat. I pressed the button. Again and again, nothing, no hiss of hydraulics, no click of release. The doors won't open, not from inside the train, but from the tunnel itself. A faint, echoing murmur like 1,000 voices speaking just beyond the edge of hearing, their words sliding and overlapping, impossible to decipher. It was a sound that didn't just reach my ears. It seeped into my skull, vibrating behind my eyes. The chorale of echoes. That was its name. The journals had warned. The rumble intensified, a low growl that seemed to emanate from the very ground, not from an approaching train. It was the sound of something immense, something ancient stirring. My heart hammered against my ribs, a trapped bird desperate for escape. I tried to pull to force it, but it was solid, immovable. A sudden sharp clang echoed from deeper in the tunnel, followed by a wet, scraping sound. I spun around, my eyes straining into the gloom. The air grew heavier, thick and cloying, like breathing through wet wool. My vision blurred at the edges, the flickering lights seeming to stretch and warp. It was a song of static, a hymn of fractured thought. It wasn't just a haunting, it was a hunger, not for my flesh, not for my blood, but for my mind. It wanted to consume my identity, to anchor itself within the last remnants of William. It wasn't just about possession, it was about replacement. It wasn't a symbol of breaking free, but of being broken into, a point of ingress. The previous hosts, the ancestors whose names filled the journals, they hadn't just died. They had been devoured, their minds becoming part of the chorale, their echoes adding to its horrifying song. And I was next. My name on that tree, the designation. A memory fragmented and sharp from one of the journals I'd dismissed as the ramblings of a madman. A countermeasure. A desperate, dangerous ritual. It involved an object. Not a sacrifice of life, but an exchange, a binding. Something to repel, to sever, to contain. The journal had spoken of a specific artifact, passed down through generations, hidden away. A locket, not just any locket, but the locket. The one I'd found tucked into a velvet pouch, forgotten in the bottom of my grandmother's old hope chest. My wife's locket, engraved with her initials and a small, intricate depiction of a closed eye. It was supposed to be a gift for her. A family heirloom I'd planned to give her on our anniversary before everything. It was meant to hold her picture. It was meant to hold her. The locket wasn't just sentimental, it was a trap, a binding agent. The journal entries, scribbled in a frantic, spidery hand, spoke of its ability to contain, to reflect, to seal. But it was dangerous. It required a specific, terrible intent. It demanded a part of the user, a projection of will, a focus of grief and defiance. Not mine, at least. It was a primal tremor, a shudder of fear, yet intertwined with a fierce, burning resolve. I wouldn't let it take me. I wouldn't become another echo, the locket. I had to get back to the manor, I had to find it. But how do I escape this place? And what exactly did the ritual entail, beyond merely holding the locket? What did it mean to truly bind something so ancient, so vast, so utterly alien? With an object meant for love, my name etched into that ancient bleeding bark felt less like a mark of ownership and more like a brand. A cold, internal fire pulsed from it, mirroring the dark, viscous sap that oozed like crude oil. My name, William, not just a legacy but a claim. The fractured anchor symbol beside it, a jagged wound in the gnarled wood, solidified a truth I had only glimpsed in fevered nightmares. I was tethered, but a tether could be cut. A new resolve hardened my jaw. The fear was still a lead weight in my gut, a constant tremor in my hands, but beneath it a desperate fury had ignited. I wasn't just a victim anymore, I was a fighter. I turned from the blasphemous tree, the chill of its silent declaration clinging to my clothes, and strode back towards the manor. The air inside was thick, heavy with the scent of dust, decay, and something else, a metallic tang, like old pennies and fresh blood. My objective was clear: the study. Grandmother's journals, the fragmented notes, the cryptic diagrams I dismissed as madness now held the key. I had studied them in manic bursts, piecing together the desperate attempts of my ancestors to appease, to control, to fight. It fed on memory, on grief, on the very fabric of identity. To confront it, to starve it, I needed to unravel its hold on my own history, to sever the connections it had woven through generations of my bloodline. The house seemed to breathe around me as I moved, a living entity anticipating my defiance. Floorboards groaned underfoot, not with age, but with a deliberate, dragging sound, as if something heavy was being pulled across the ceiling directly above me. I pushed through the double doors of the study. Bookshelves, once orderly, now leaned precariously, their contents spilling onto the mahogany desk. Pages fluttered from open books as if stirred by an unseen breath. I ignored the chaos, my eyes fixed on the locked drawer I had forced open days ago. Inside, among the brittle parchments, lay the tools I needed: a tarnished silver locket, a dried sprig of nightshade, and a small, leather-bound book filled with my grandmother's spidery script, detailing the counter-ritual. It was less a ritual of banishment and more one of severance. A desperate gamble to cut the entity off from its generational hosts. It was empty. The instructions were precise, horrifying. I had to fill it with a piece of my own past, a memory, a fragment of my grief. I had to offer it, then reclaim it whole, a paradox, a trick. As I began to read the incantation aloud, my voice rasped, weak against the growing murmur of the house. The words, ancient and guttural, felt wrong on my tongue, like tasting rust. The air grew impossibly heavy, pressing in on my chest. The walls of the study began to ripple, the wallpaper peeling back in long, curling strips that revealed not plaster, but raw, pulsing muscle. The scent of ozone filled my nostrils, sharp and acrid. A low hum began, vibrating through the floor, up my legs, into my teeth. They were my memories, my fears, twisted and amplified. The laughter of my wife, distorted into a guttural shriek. The distant wail of a siren on the day of her accident. The quiet click of the coffin lid. "No," I choked out, forcing the next line of the counter-ritual past my lips. The hum intensified, becoming a deafening roar. The bookshelves melted like wax, the desk fractured into 1,000 splinters. Then, with a sickening lurch, I landed, not on solid ground, but on a grimy, vibrating floor. The air was thick with the smell of stale metal, ozone, and something else, something uniquely urban, exhaust fumes and damp concrete. A sudden, jarring clang echoed through the space. My eyes, wide and panicked, adjusted to the dim, flickering fluorescent lights overhead. The train itself was a derelict hulk, its windows opaque with grime, its metallic skin scarred with graffiti. It pulsed with a low, mechanical thrum, as if trying to move despite being utterly stationary. Nothing. No handle, no emergency release. Just a solid, seamless wall. The air was frigid, biting at my exposed skin, yet sweat beaded on my forehead. They coalesced into distinct voices now, familiar yet terrifyingly wrong. My grandmother, her voice like grinding stone, reciting the pact. My wife, her voice a siren song, calling my name, but the syllables were stretched, distorted, filled with a hunger that was not her own. I pressed my back against the train's cold metal side, scanning the impassable tunnel. Stretched endlessly in both directions, disappearing into the gloom. The tracks, rusted and overgrown, shimmered with a faint, iridescent sheen. Where had the study gone? There was this a manifestation, a trap. It grew louder, a rhythmic drag, like something impossibly heavy being pulled along the tracks. The cold fire that pulsed from my name, etched into the rough bark, didn't fade. It intensified, a deep internal hum that vibrated through my bones, drawing me, pulling me. One moment, the damp, earthen smell of the manor's buried roots filled my nostrils. The next, a metallic tang, sharp and acrid, stung my tongue. The air grew thick, heavy with the stench of ozone and damp concrete. I was no longer in the manor's forgotten depths. I was here. The shuddering vibration of the floor beneath my feet was immediate, jarring. My hands instinctively reached out, finding cold, grimy metal. This was the subway tunnel, last train, doors won't open. The train groaned. A sound like tortured steel, but it wasn't moving. It simply pulsed, a living, breathing thing trapped within the tunnel's throat. The windows were opaque with grime and the blackness of the tunnel, reflecting only my own distorted face, a pale, gaunt mask of determination. It wasn't a single voice. It was a murmur, a rising tide of countless tiny sounds, like grains of sand shifting on an endless beach, or the collective sigh of a forgotten crowd. It was here. With me. My breath hitched, not from fear, but from the raw, potent energy that filled the space. It tasted like static electricity and old blood. My name, burning in my mind, felt like a beacon, a target. I was the designated host, but I wasn't just a vessel. I was William. Fragments of sound, a child's laugh, the clinking of teacups, a distant siren, the rustle of leaves, a familiar melody that twisted my gut. My wife. Her voice, a phantom caress against my ear. Murmuring my name. William. It wasn't real. It couldn't be. This was its tactic, its lure. It fed on grief, on memory, on the echoes of what was lost. My eyes scanned the empty carriage. No other passenger existed, only me and the rising tide of sound. The train's interior, once mundane, began to ripple. The seats seemed to sag and swell. The advertisements on the walls blurred into indistinct, swirling colors. A low, guttural thrum began to emanate from the floor, vibrating up through my shoes, into my spine, and directly into the base of my skull. It wasn't a mechanical sound. It was organic, vast, like the slow, deliberate pulse of something impossibly ancient and impossibly huge. The chorale of echoes wasn't just a collection of sounds. It was a presence, a colossal, invisible weight pressing in on all sides. I closed my eyes, fighting the urge to succumb, to let the familiar, comforting echoes wash over me, to drown in the illusion of her presence. No, I wouldn't, I couldn't. The pact, my ancestors' mistake, my burden, I had to sever it, but how? The anchor symbol fractured, bleeding from the tree. It was a link, a connection. A sacrifice was required, not just life, but something deeper, something that fed the chorale, my memories, my grief, the very things that made me, that made me vulnerable. A vision flashed behind my eyelids, my wife laughing in the garden. Sunlight catching her hair, her hand in mine, warm and familiar. A wave of sickening pain. The entity pressed harder, flooding my mind with these precious fragments, twisting them, distorting them, making them sound like a mocking chorus. You miss her, you need her. Let us comfort you, let us be her. My jaw clenched. I opened my eyes. The train carriage was no longer discernible. It was overwhelming, deafening, a direct assault on my sanity. My head throbbed. A relentless drumbeat against my skull. I had to give it what it wanted, but on my terms. Not my life, not my soul, something else. Something it craved, something it fed on, but in a way that would cripple it, starve it. The fractured anchor symbol, it wasn't just a mark of ownership. It was a key, a release valve. To break the pact, I had to offer the very thing that made me susceptible, the very thing it used to bind me. My connection to the past, my memories of her, the profound, aching grief that was her legacy. It was a terrible, agonizing thought. But if I didn't, it would consume me and then everyone else. The chorale would spread, a contagion of forgotten echoes, twisting reality until nothing remained but its hungry, endless song. I took a deep, shuddering breath, the metallic air burning my lungs. I reached out, not physically, but internally, searching for that burning anchor, that claim on my soul. I found it, a searing point of light and pain within my chest. I focused on it, on the intricate, broken lines of its design. And then, with a will I didn't know I possessed, I began to pull. I pulled not at the symbol itself, but at the memories it represented, the grief it fed. I pictured her face, her smile, the way she wrinkled her nose when she laughed, and I began to tear them not from my mind, but from the entity's grasp. I was offering them, yes, but as a poison, a final, concentrated dose it couldn't digest. The chorale shrieked. The carriage bucked violently, throwing me against the cold metal. My head hit the panel with a dull thud, but I barely registered the pain. My vision swam. I was emptying myself, not of life, but of the very fuel that powered this horror. Each memory, each pang of sorrow, I focused it, condensed it, and then pushed it out into the core of the screaming entity. It was like offering a starving beast its favorite meal, but laced with a lethal venom. The train convulsed again, a desperate dying spasm. The lights flickered, died, then flared to an impassable, blinding white. The roar of the chorale intensified, then fractured, breaking into a million splintered, chaotic sounds before beginning to recede. It was retreating, not banished, but wounded, gorged on a bitter feast. A profound emptiness bloomed within me, a vast, echoing chamber where a vibrant garden once stood. The pain of loss was gone, the raw edges of grief smoothed away. Her face, her name, the sound of her voice, they were there, somewhere like faint impressions in sand, but the vivid, visceral connection, the ache in my chest, was gone. It was the sacrifice, the ultimate price. The blinding light faded. The train carriage slowly reformed, the seats no longer swelling, the walls no longer shimmering. The metallic tang in the air lessened, replaced by the stale, damp smell of the subway. Thrumming vibration ceased. I pushed myself up, my body aching, my head pounding. They still wouldn't open. I was trapped. But the chorale was gone, or was it? What had I truly done? And what now was left of William? The roar. It wasn't just sound, it was a physical force, tearing at the edges of my vision, vibrating through my teeth. Impossible colors swirled, coalescing into shapes that defied geometry, then dissolving into pure light. I felt myself stretching, thinning, like a sheet of paper pulled taut, about to rip. 1,000 voices screamed, "William, William, William," each one my own, each one a stranger. My mind was a sieve, leaking memories, hopes, fears, all of it dissolving into the chaotic symphony. I fought. I didn't know how or why, but a stubborn, primal core of me refused to break. I clawed at the dissolving edges of myself, held onto the searing image of my wife's face, a beacon in the storm. I screamed her name, a raw, guttural sound that was swallowed whole by the chorus. And then, a violent, sickening lurch. The impossible geometries shattered like glass. The roaring symphony snapped into a sudden, deafening silence. My vision reeled, then steadied. I was slumped against the grimy seat of the subway carriage, the familiar, stale tang of ozone and old metal filling my nostrils. My breath hitched, a ragged, painful gasp. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting a sickly yellow glow on the empty seats. The train was still, utterly, unnervingly still. I pushed myself upright, my muscles protesting with a dull ache. My head throbbed, a relentless drumbeat behind my eyes. I looked around, confusion warring with a profound sense of disorientation. This was it. The subway tunnel, last train, doors won't open. The dull, metallic clang of the tracks outside was absent. No distant rumble of another train, no faint echo of city life. Just the oppressive, suffocating quiet. I stumbled towards the doors, my hand reaching for the release bar. I pressed down hard, nothing. I tried again, straining my grip tight. The doors remained sealed, a solid, unyielding barrier of steel and grimy glass. I pressed my face against the window, peering out into the inky blackness of the tunnel. It was absolute. Not a single light, not a glimmer of an exit. There was I truly alone in this inert metal coffin. A shiver traced its way down my spine, independent of the train's stale, cool air. It was the echo, a faint, almost imperceptible hum that resonated deep within my bones. Not the roar from before, but a lingering resonance, like a bell that had just ceased ringing, its vibrations still lingering in the air. I shook my head, trying to dislodge the sensation. A trick of the mind, just the aftermath of whatever that had been. I found myself pacing the length of the carriage, a restless energy thrumming beneath my skin. Each step felt heavy, yet disconnected, as if my feet weren't quite making full contact with the floor. My eyes darted from window to window, searching for a crack, a flaw, anything that suggested an escape. Hours bled into an eternity. My throat was raw, my eyes gritty, but something else was there too. A flicker of something I couldn't quite name, an intensity that hadn't been there before. A subtle shift in the way light caught my pupils, making them seem deeper, older. There was this truly me looking back. Then, with a sudden, jarring hiss, the doors sighed open. I stared, unblinking, at the gap. Beyond it, the tunnel was still black, but now, far, far in the distance, a faint, almost imperceptible light pulsed, like a dying ember. A way out, or another trap. The light pulsed again, a hypnotic rhythm. I started walking, each step echoing unnaturally in the vast emptiness. It felt like walking through a dream, or perhaps a memory I hadn't yet lived. Had I truly escaped, or merely traded one prison for another? The manor stood exactly as I had left it, hunched against the bruised dawn sky, its gables sharp teeth against the gray. A strange sense of homecoming, not of comfort, but of inevitability, washed over me. The air here was different now, too, thicker, quieter. The usual creaks and groans of the old house were muted, replaced by a profound, almost reverent stillness. Inside, the dust motes danced in the sparse light filtering through the stained glass, undisturbed. Nothing seemed out of place. No overturned furniture, no shattered glass, no sign of the profound disruption I had just endured. Yet everything felt altered. The silence was no longer empty. It hummed with a low, resonant frequency that only I seemed to perceive. It was the echo again, louder now. I walked through the empty rooms, my footsteps unnaturally loud. The grand staircase, the library, the drawing room, each familiar space felt subtly wrong, like a cherished photograph subtly retouched. The house was a vessel, and it had been changed. Not physically scarred, but imbued with something new, something that had seeped into its very timbers. And I realized, was imbued with it too. I stopped in the library, my gaze falling on the collection of ancient, leather-bound tomes, my grandmother's books. My hand reached out, not in fear, but with a strange, almost compulsive curiosity. My fingers brushed against the spine of a book I had previously recoiled from. I closed my eyes, listening. The hum was everywhere, not just in the books, not just in the house, but within me. They weren't screaming my name anymore. They were simply their asterisk. A deep, resonant chord struck within the deepest chambers of my being. I opened my eyes. The library was still. The house was still. But the world, for me, had irrevocably shifted. I was no longer merely hearing the echoes. I was part of the chorale. There was this salvation, or merely a more insidious form of possession.